So today we're going to be looking at one of the most essential elements in writing an unforgettable fantasy, and that is world building. So to that end, we've pulled in two of the biggest hitters in the world of world building, Janet and Dimitris from World Anvil, and they have put together a community of over 1 million world builders. Is that right?
1.3 million world builders.
1.3
right now.
I love it. Dimitris says he's been world building since he was 6 and has created more epic sandbox worlds than he's had hot dinners. He spends his days coding new features on World Anvil and his nights dreaming about new worlds and civilizations, which I suspect is the same case with a lot of you. Janet is his partner in crime. She's a published fantasy author and RPG writer under the pen name JD Blythe. She's also a Dungeons & Dragons pro streamer for the likes of Wizards of the Coast and The Weird Game. So welcome, both of you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, good. So like yesterday, what I'm going to do is hand over to these folks and I'll disappear but I'll keep an eye on the question and answer box. So if you have specific questions that you want me to ask them at the end, put them in the Q&A box. If you're just chatting or wanting to comment, stick it in the chat box. And if you put to panelists and all attendees, if you have any comments or want to share anything, then everybody in the chat can see it. And with that, I'm going to hand over to you.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, cool.
So obviously today we are talking about world building. And we thought, okay, so we have a big community of world builders of all kinds, and they tend to ask a lot of the same questions. So we thought, all right, let's make sure that we are addressing the kinds of questions that we think you're going to ask. And then at the end, you can ask even more questions. And we're here for you, basically, is what we're saying. If you want more of this kind of stuff, by the way, we go live 3 times a week on our Twitch channel. And we also have a YouTube channel. So, you know, if you want to have more of this kind of advice, ask more questions outside of this that occur to you later, it always happens to me, then yeah, you can find us there as well, just to let you know. So let's talk about world building. What is world building? That's us. That's the smiling and waving portion. Yes. Obviously, we are all about world building. World Anvil is our baby. We've spent 3.5 years growing it. It's a world building platform where you can, you know, build, create your worlds, manage everything, find everything, and link it all to your novel as well. And even write your novel if you want to. But yeah, really what we're talking about today is world building. We will be doing a walkthrough of World Anvil on Thursday. So if you want to know more about our software, come back then. We are not here to tell you about that today. We really are just here to educate, share our experiences as world builders and as professional writers. So yeah, when people think about world building, they often think about setting in very physical terms. So they might think about, you know, what does the geography look like? What do the buildings look like? What does the physical aspects of the world look like? And they might even go so far as to think of things like magic system.
Yeah.
But world building, when you really examine it, is an absolutely massive topic, which is awesome, which you're probably doing already, which is also awesome. So if you're sitting there thinking, oh my God, I don't know anything about world building, you're probably doing it already. So stay with me on this one. Settings are more than just the physics and the physical aspects. They are people and places and things and concepts. So when we talk about things, that's the physical aspect, and places, that might be the geography of your world, but it's also the MacGuffins, it's the magical items, it's the vehicles, the landmarks, the technology, it's even things like the architectural styles, right? The aesthetics of a culture. Mm-hmm. But world building is also characters and people, because we know from our own lives, we are a creation of our environment.
Absolutely, and definitely our story and our history before us really will affect the world and what the world is about.
Absolutely, and even if you as a character, you personally or your main character, goes against their background, that background is still a massive influence on their life, yeah. Right? So yeah, and that then bleeds out into cultures and organizations and religions and all of that other stuff that stems out and then re-influences characters.
Which is effectively what the living of the world how the living of the world affect the world around them in the
Absolutely.
past and possibly in the future. We'll talk about that later on.
Exactly. And then finally, concepts. So magic systems we've already mentioned, but things like natural laws. How are the natural laws of your world
How does
different?
gravity affect essentially everything? Do you have flying islands, and what does this mean for your world? Or can you fly through the ether, for example, like in Treasure Island, for example, which is a completely different thing?
Absolutely. And all of this stuff is probably stuff that you're already thinking about, because it's a natural part of any plot or any story that we set in a speculative fiction world. You have to think about this stuff. So that's great news. You guys are already world building. How can we do it better? Over the rest of this talk, we are going to answer the questions: where do I start? How do I start? When and where does the world building even happen? Like, at what point should I be doing it, and how should I work that in? We're going to be talking about world building exposition, which is again one of our biggest questions. Okay, I've built my setting. How do I deliver it to my readers without having a prologue the size of my planet? Because we all know this. We want to be sharing our world building in a way that's exciting for our readers. And finally, are my ideas original enough? This is one of the biggest questions we get asked. So we'll be dealing with that as well. All right, so let's kick off with, where do I start world building? Ideas can come from anywhere. Sometimes they come from a character concept. Sometimes they come from a scene that we are playing through our heads.
Yeah, or something we visited effectively and we saw, like you going to the museum, which you used to do very often, for example.
Absolutely. So you can see a historical artifact and it just sets something off in your head. And you start to have the idea for a story, or for a setting, or for a story and a setting. We know this as writers. These ideas, we fall over them every day. And the more we wonder and the more we explore, the more we come across these ideas. So that's awesome. But once you have the idea, where do you go next, right? That's always the problem. So what we suggest is that you start by thinking about what you do know about your world. So we call this the world meta. It's the meta information, because nobody in your world probably is going to walk around saying, this is a gritty fantasy world with dark overtones. They're going to live in the world, right? So that's why it's the meta information. Genre is a big one to start with. Yeah.
Themes as well will play a big role, and themes effectively are things that reoccur in your world in order to establish the setting without, in fact, going into the point of saying, essentially, this is a dark world, for example.
Right, exactly.
But every world and every setting will have themes that will reinforce the setting without talking about it, and putting those patterns again and again to the story will make it reinforce the character and the genre of the book without, in fact, having to say anything like that.
Totally. So a typical cyberpunk theme, for example, is
neon
lights and rain. Now, the reason for that is because it's high tech, low life, which is one of the key concepts of a cyberpunk world. So think about your genre and your genre expectations. Now genre is a sliding scale, right? It doesn't mean you tick the fantasy box and that's it, you're only writing fantasy. Fantasy is a massive, glorious, multifaceted joy of a genre, and you can blend it with a lot of other things. Think about your technology level. This is a big one that I see people forget to think about early on. And then they have problems reconciling, okay, why don't they just shoot him with a gun? Because guns exist in your world. So thinking about your technology level, making sure that you're considering that's a really important thing early on. And again, the other thing is the mood.
Yes.
Now, if Game of Thrones suddenly had magical, fluffy unicorns that gambled in from the dead forest and started singing happy fairy songs, it would feel genre breaking.
Yes.
And it would feel mood breaking. So mood is a varied thing. You don't want every single scene to be depressing. You don't want every single scene to be one particular mood, but understanding the boundaries of your mood as you go forward is going to help make sure that everything you build is going to serve your story. It's going to serve the genre, the mood. It's going to serve everything that you want to convey as you write the story, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think that setting those up in the very beginning, even if it's a matter of writing 1 or 2 sentences for each of them, will help you and will allow you to focus back when you come back to your meta effectively. Imagine meta like your Bible beside your book, or the introduction to your world building book of any sort.
Absolutely.
That will allow you to go back there and read them and remind yourself what you're supposed to be writing, what are the things you should be using, what is the mood you're trying to convey, so you don't veer very far away from them.
Absolutely. So as an example, I am currently writing the Dark Crystal RPG. It's awesome fun, by the way, like exploring the world of Thra has been amazing. But one of the things that I've had to do consistently every time I want to introduce something into that world, which is already massive and really rich, is go back to those first principles and say, okay, does this thing I want to introduce go with this? Does it fit the mood? Does it fit the tone? Does it fit the technology level? Because otherwise I'm introducing stuff into the world that doesn't make sense.
Yes.
And that would be problematic if it was my world.
So
but it's not even my world, right?
Yes. It's a sense-checking document, essentially.
Exactly.
That's the idea.
So this is the idea, is that you start with these ideas of what you do know. The other thing that it's great to start with is your inspirations for this world.
Absolutely.
When you think of your idea, what are the things that join in with that idea? When you think, okay, I want to do a fantasy, a dark fantasy epic novel, what are the inspirations and the influences that come in from that?
Yeah, and this can be movies that you like, TV series, other books, of course, imagery, very commonly, in fact, music.
Yeah.
Music. Many artists and many authors follow music, and they have music that they listen to when they write a specific book to put them into that mood effectively when they're writing and to keep on their genre. And this kind of list of inspirations can be a very good place for you to have, even if that's a Spotify list, or it is a way for you to have essentially a small carousel of images, a Pinterest board, or anything like that.
Yeah, starting with this, putting this all together in this sort of meta information document that you can go back and access is really, really going to help you. The third thing is your hook, your USP. That's a unique selling point. Now, unique is a very dangerous word when we talk about writing, because nothing is original, right? Nothing is new. Like, the ancient Greeks were spinning stories that were spun by the Babylonians, right? So we all know this, and that's fine. But when we say unique selling point, it's the thing that made you go, oh my God, this thing is so cool because, right? It's the thing that got you so excited. It's the thing that made it look like the shiny plot bunny that you had to go after when you should have been writing the other thing, which, again, I know that pain. This is so important. This is your motivation. Do not underestimate the importance of staying motivated during your world, during your project.
Yeah. I mean, one of the biggest, most of the projects, in fact, out there fail because the motivation fizzles out one way or another.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, when you see, oh, you stopped writing that book, why? Oh, I just didn't feel it anymore. Having that hook written somewhere that you can go back to it again and again, that is the kernel of your idea.
Yeah, it's almost like a contract with yourself, saying that I'm doing this project because I want to achieve that, or I would like to talk about that. And this is a place that you go back once again, as we said before, after you've written a sentence about that, to say, okay, this is the reason I'm writing what I'm writing, and this is how I'm going to achieve it, and that's why I want to continue doing it. Absolutely. So when you are feeling bad and you're not feeling necessarily, you're not feeling the inspiration, you can go back, read it again, and remind yourself why you're doing it.
Why it was awesome. Yes. The other thing that it's great for, by the way, just if anybody suffers from this, is it's really good for combating imposter syndrome. Getting excited about your project keeps your eyes on the prize. It stops you worrying about everything else. So yeah, big recommend there. So just to recap, for your meta, that is genre, technology level, and mood, inspirations, your hook or your USP, that like kernel of your idea, and your motivation. Yeah. All of this information could be found on the meta on World Anvil if you need it. And again, YouTube channel informations. Just before we go ahead, because the next question is when and how does the world building happen? I want to take a moment to talk about documentation. You have to keep track of your ideas, because otherwise you end up contradicting yourself in your book.
Absolutely.
And that's really painful. And if you have to go back and pick it out later and like unpick what you've done because something behaved one way in one scene and a different way in another scene, that is a really big problem. And it's going to be a big time drain, basically.
Yes.
There is nothing more disheartening or time consuming than scrolling through endless chapters because you can't remember the name of the thing that you made, which meant that you can't search for it.
Or the color of the eyes of the author, of one of the persons that are involved in your novel, for example.
Exactly. So obviously we have a tool. We're not trying to sell it today. It works. It's great. But however you do this, make sure it is quickly searchable, quickly editable, and easily accessible.
Yes, because if any of those three do not work, you will soon enough find out that you will not be using it because it's going to be a tool that's going to be very hard to use and it will not add value. So make sure that no matter what you write for your world building, it's organized, it's easily searchable, and easily editable. This is very important no matter how you do it.
Yeah. I would also add, we are writers. We love writing in prose. Do not write your world building notes in prose. It will hurt you.
Yeah, it should be as succinct and as clean and as simple as possible. In effect, start with small sentences if that's possible for everything. Like, for example, if you mention the name of a settlement, like a city or a town, write a sentence saying this is a city that was mentioned about that, and it has that. And we said, for example, it has beautiful forest in the north.
Right.
This is enough for something to start getting shape. Once you continue and you have more information or a scene written in that location, then you can start adding to that. But make sure that you have that, because then you will find it as well. Of course, if you are able and the tool that you're having has any form of tagging, that will be very important. For example, you create a settlement, call it chapter 1, call it, I don't know, some elven settlement or whatever
Link
this
in
might
an
be.
NPC or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you know who you're talking about, and you can, when you don't remember the name, you can still find it by saying, okay, I remember it was
a
Elven
settlement.
City.
I've only created 10 of them. That's a searchable list.
Exactly.
So that's what we've just been talking about. We're slightly behind in our slides, sorry. That is the meta and a little bit about documentation. Again, just make sure however you choose to do it, you keep your book Bible or your series Bible easy to understand. So, and then the question is, when am I world building? So this is really personal. It's also partly about what kind of writer you are. If you're plotting, then there will be a certain amount of world building that you need to do to make your plot. Because there's only so long that you can call it evil organization number 2 before you have to give it a name and some details, right? So that is one aspect. And then of course, discovery writers, I do both, incidentally. I'm both a plotter and a pantser, depending on the project. Discovery writers like to throw out cool ideas and cool names and then go back and think about what they might mean later. Both are fine, all right? Just make sure you're keeping track of what you're throwing out. And if you establish something, what you've established, so that you don't give yourself migraines in the future. Broadly speaking, there are 2 main world building methodologies and one good world building methodology. I shouldn't say that, it's ours.
No.
So there is top down. This is classic Tolkien. I make my world and then I tell stories in it so I can use it, right? It's conlangs, it's history, it's big, it's expansive.
Massive maps.
Massive maps. You build before you write. You start at this very wide level and you slowly zoom into the POV character
And
level.
if you're talking, you're writing like 4 years, ages back before you even start writing your own story, effectively.
Yeah. Just to be clear, I'm a massive fan of Tolkien. I really have enjoyed his works. He also taught my grandmother, so I have like a family connection. But there are cons with this kind of world building. It takes a long time. It takes a long time until you can write your book, which is what most of us are here to do. Like until you can like have an actionable result. And again, that ties back to motivation.
Yeah.
There's a long time before you get that reward of, I finished the first draft.
Yeah, you won't have that with this kind of world building. Of course, there are people who cannot write in any other way. Mm-hmm. Like there are people who really need to have a solidified world before they try to write stories in it. And for those people, that will be effectively a good way of starting, but it's definitely not the one that will get you the book out quickly.
Yeah. Ella Elbury says, I love Tolkien. There's nothing wrong with loving Tolkien. Tolkien is great, as I say. We have a lot of respect for Tolkien. But the realistic point that we're making is that there is a lot of world building up front before you get to the writing.
Yeah.
That's fine, but you need to know what you're in for. All right?
I saw in the chat, by the way, before they were saying we have these all the slides. These are all the slides so far, but don't worry, we will have extended notes for you tomorrow probably. So
yeah,
you can
so we'll get those to Lisa, and Lisa can get those to you.
Yes.
The other type of world building is bottom-up world building. Yes. This is often done by pantsers as they pants their way through their first draft. By pantsers, I mean, of course, discovery writers, people who start with an idea and a burning need to get the words on the page and then develop and refine later. They find their plot, essentially. That's why they're often called discovery writers. So often you're building as you write, or building as you're building your character profiles and then writing. This is a bottom up. So you start at the person level and then you look upwards and try and discover what's above. You're zooming out to understand big organizations, large units, how countries work.
Creation of the world and
Absolutely.
Everything like that.
Sometimes even to the point that you don't know how the magic system works until your character uses their first spell.
Which is a bit dangerous, to be fair, because it opens you up to the danger of writing things that will contradict each other. Absolutely. Or that will set you up in a corner.
Absolutely. Yeah. So those are some of the cons of bottom up. The world lacks scope. It can lack cohesiveness because it can feel only as large as your character. We're going to talk about Mary Sue world building later. It is a common world building problem. But this essentially can lead to Mary Sue world building. And the other thing is that it can lead to what we call mosaic world building. So each area of your world is a separate unit and they have nothing in common, no interaction, no integration. They feel like completely different settings.
And that is because effectively of the lack of the top view to effectively merge the parts of the world together.
Yeah.
It's like essentially seeing the maps that you see sometimes, fantasy maps that you have like the ice lands and the desert lands and the plain lands and the elven lands.
It's like nothing in between.
Exactly. Or there are some things in between, but effectively they are so sharply separated that you don't feel effectively the cultural or ethnic distribution Absolutely. Going there, or the religion spreading or anything like that.
Yeah.
Maybe.
It's like the ice stops here. Yes. And that's it. Again, like it's so personal, but when we're talking about world building, not realistic because this is fantasy, but that feels authentic, then that's absolutely not what we want, right? We want to create something that feels like a single, beautiful, cohesive network of a world with these unique corners inside it.
Yes.
That's the aim. All right, so what we suggest is agile world building. We have 2 massive seminars for this on our YouTube channel, but we didn't want to just give a seminar on this today. So
I think we have dominated the whole time
with agile world building, exactly. Right? Exactly. But in brief, it's a combi approach, right? So you start with an overview. You understand the general history of the world.
We start with the meta, in fact, that we've
Exactly.
already discussed. Yeah.
Exactly. So you understand the general history of your world, the big events that happened. If there was a cataclysm, you need to know about that cataclysm. If there was
not everything, but you need to know some of the things.
Yeah, the TLDR,
yes.
Too long didn't read about the cataclysm. You can always add detail later, and that's what agile world building is about. You need to know the basic points. The people who live over here, do you have elves or dwarves? Do you have kobolds? Do you have something else in your world? Do you only humans?
And again, writing, for example, about your species or your races, however you want to call it, species is a much better title for that. You don't need to write the whole history, and you don't need to write every single detail about all their lands, but you should write a description of a paragraph or 2 explaining what this creature is, what development level they have, how they look, what are the basic culture information they have about them, and possibly a very small part about the history, which is going to be important to your story. That's very important, especially for writers, because you don't want to write the whole history of the orcs because you just said, oh, there's going to be an orc there, kind of thing.
You don't need to know every king, right?
Yes. Exactly.
I say this as somebody who once tried to build every king. You do not need to know every king. We have learned this through pain.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, agile world building is the idea that you don't write everything, and you don't try to focus either in the top towards bottom or the bottom towards up. But what you do is that you use a cycle like agile development that gets you through the idea of going.
Yeah. So essentially, once you've built this big overview, You start with your plot or your characters or your first draft, or if you're a pantser, you'll be going straight in with the first draft. If you're a plotter, you'll be thinking about plotting. You start with writing based on what you have, thinking about what you've written, linking that stuff back into your series Bible, thinking about how well it goes in. If you need to do any retcons at that stage, that's okay. Nobody's read it yet. You can change whatever you want. If you've established that there are 4 elemental powers in your world, earth, air, fire, and water, like Avatar, and then suddenly somebody starts, I don't know, gravity bending.
Yes. Then that could be world building.
Then there's some world building work to do. Is this related to one of these 4? Is it a forgotten 5th power? How does this work? And I think, and then of course, you'll be dreaming and designing how it works. You'll be building in just very brief notes. An offshoot of this is gravity building, for example. And then something about what gravity building can do. A reference to your first manuscript is a useful thing. So you can see what you've written. In fact, what I often do when I'm writing is I'll just copy paste that little quote and put it next to what I've written. Because it also means I can go search it easily in the document. So you're helping yourself back and forward. And then you start writing again. And it's that constant feedback loop of create, sense check, dream, what could this be? Where could this go? And then build. The beauty of agile world building, as opposed to the other methods, is that you are only building what you need. If you built a continent over there and you're top down and nobody ever goes there, you've spent some time on that.
Yeah, in agile world building, you just write a sentence
Exactly.
saying there is a continent, these people come from there.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. That's
Absolutely.
all you need to know.
Absolutely. So regardless if you use top down, bottom up, agile world building, there are 2 critical questions you should be asking yourself. Why is this here? Why this? What is it serving? Is it serving my tone? Is it serving my genre? Is it serving my character? Is it serving my plot? And then, if this thing exists, what does that mean for the rest of the world? For example, there's an isolated village in a land surrounded by demons. Why is this here? Well, it's here because I have a world that's very dark. It's here because I want things to feel very desperate at the beginning of my story. It's here because I need somewhere for my main character to come from, right? There's reasons. Good. Okay, so the why is served. So if this village exists, then what is it doing there? Mm-hmm. How is it protecting itself, right?
How do they feed themselves if
Absolutely.
there are demons around, for example?
Absolutely. How do you kill a demon? How do you keep them back?
Why are they kept back, for example?
Why are these people not moved somewhere else yet? Like, there must be a reason that they have stayed in this spot. If this village has stayed there, why? Maybe it's a mining outpost. Mm-hmm. Maybe it is a space that is historically important and the people are culturally proud and don't want to leave them.
Maybe there is a lighthouse on the top that in fact pushes the demons away. So effectively it's like an island of civilization in the middle of darkness kind of thing. That can be an idea.
Absolutely. So by asking why and by asking if this, then what, we start to build things. We start to spin these things out. And when we're talking about things, we mean everything. We mean cultures, traditions, we mean items, we mean characters, species.
That is something, in fact, very important. People very often write the history of their world, and it's a beautiful idea. It's, in fact, a great idea to write a timeline. That's why we have them in World Anvil, in fact, because timelines can help you get perspective on what's happening. But they don't think about rituals and cultures and traditions. And ritual and culture, I mean anything from a board game or a nursery rhyme that came from through history, because that's how nursery rhymes come, in fact. You know, there are essentially stories taught to children through tradition in order to keep the stories alive, kind of thing. So this is something that it comes to if that, then what. So essentially that event happened, but what is it triggered? Is there essentially any day we celebrate it or any day we remember it? Or are there any stories, any legends? Because, you know, history does not have to be the real history.
Yeah, it's the history they remembered.
Exactly. There are 2 types of histories. The history that actually happened and you know as the author, and the history that is remembered or being told or has been necessarily propagated through propaganda, for example.
Right. And that comes back to things like unreliable narrators, and there's a lot of things that you can do with that, secret histories, all of that stuff. We're going to talk more about more about how to deliver exposition in a minute, because I think I can see a lot of you are saying, I just like world building and I don't care if it's not going to get used. We're going to help you. We're going to help you get it used. That's where we're at. So yeah, if you are thinking, okay, well, what should I be building? Again, I'm not trying to shill World Anvil, but on World Anvil, there is a big panel with lots of different world building templates. Each of those world building templates is full of prompts that will help you build the things.
Yes.
So it will help you build your settlement. And then there are prompts to say, what's the history of the settlement, which is the moment to say.
What's the infrastructure, for example?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Infrastructure. Keep demons back.
Well, defenses, walls, or the light, whatever they might
Absolutely. Absolutely. So again, if you're doing top down or bottom up, just make sure every time you are asking, why this? Is it serving my setting? Is it serving my meta? And if this, then what?
Yeah.
Because that's where the cool details of the world building come. And that's what makes your setting feel really unique. We're going to be talking more about that.
Just to clarify, we love world building as well. We, in fact, do it pretty much all the time. Whenever we're not working for World Anvil, we do that. But our goal here is to help you write your novels and continue doing what you want to do. If you go deep into your world building, you'll find that at some point you have forgotten your original goal, which is to publish a book, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Again, whatever you build, we recommend writing it in bullet points, not prose, because it's easier to reference at a glance. We recommend organizing as you go, however you choose to do that. And yeah, if you do change things, make sure you change them everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the biggest problems with spreadsheets. In fact, because people used to use spreadsheets and still probably use spreadsheets to do world building. But the problem is that without proper tagging, it's going to be very easy for you to lose track of what you're actually doing. And at some point, yes, in the beginning will be very fine, but as it grows, first of all, some spreadsheets won't even be able to handle it. And secondly, you will start forgetting things or misplacing things or duplicating things without realizing.
Absolutely. Let's have a 30-second writing story time. The reason that World Anvil exists is because I had a 101-page Word document with all my world building in it for my fantasy world, and it crashed every now and then. By every now and then, I mean 1 and 3. And I would have sections where I was like, politics, religion. The politics and the religion were really interconnected in my world. So I would change something in the politics section, forget to change it in the religion section, my world was balked. And this just kept happening. So again, however you do it, make sure that you are just keeping your documentation up to date, because otherwise you're going to have a bad time.
Apologies for the cat. The cat really wants to join here.
Yes.
It likes you a lot.
So we've talked about what is world building and how to start and how to keep going world building with methodologies, how to keep going with your project. Let's talk about world building exposition, because this is one of the questions we get asked so often is, I have all this amazing world building in my setting. How do I share it with my readers? One of the biggest criticisms of fantasy novels when they're not done well, which I'm sure nobody here will have, is that there's too much world building being shoved in the face of the reader that doesn't feel important.
To the detriment, in fact, of the scenario. Or
exactly. And readers love books. They want to fall in love with your setting. They're waiting to fall in love with your setting. But you've got to be cunning about how you get them in. You can't just give them the vegetables up front. You've got to coax them in. So that's what we're talking about here. Exposition, of course, for those who aren't familiar with the term, it's delivering crucial information to your readers. Now, as we've talked about, crucial information is not just, you need to know this for the plot, and so you have to know it. Crucial information might also be, you go back? There we go. Crucial information might also be for tone and setting the mood, right? Crucial information might also be character backgrounds. There's all sorts of things that can be crucial information, and you as the author decide whether it's crucial or not. If it's crucial because this is a really important, unique part of your setting, then it's crucial.
Yeah, and some points, even if it might not even serve the scenario, it might serve effectively the mood and the genre, or effectively hooking people in, because you know what? Wonder does hook people in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes you will have to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've created stuff in my worlds before where I'm like, this is just really cool. It needs to be here. And then I have made sure that they come, you know. Wendy says, exposing a lot of world building in the first chapter is like saying too much about yourself on a first date. Exactly. Yes. You have to maintain a little bit of the mystery. And of course, you want your reader asking questions and wanting to know more.
Yes.
So here is what we say. Should this be there as a litmus test? If it's important for your plot, it should be there. That's foreshadowing, exposition, all of that good stuff. If it adds to the mood of your scene, it should be there. If it leads to a deeper understanding of the character, flashbacks are great for that. For example, it should be there. And finally, if you think your readers are going to say, oh my God, this is really cool, it should be there. But the key to exposition, all exposition really, is that all of your world building should be in motion and emotional.
That is something very important. People kind of forget because they write a world and it's so solidified that it's missing life effectively, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So what we're saying here, I'm going to say that one more time because it's very crucial. All world building should be in motion and emotional. So this is an extension of the show don't tell principle, right? I always misquote Chekhov when I say this. Don't tell me it's night, show me the moon glinting off broken glass. Right? So what he's saying basically is put the world in motion. Show me the effect of things on the world. Show me how the world is happening, not static. A great example of this is don't mention the table in the corner of the room unless it is either flying at your face or covered in blood, right? So we're talking here about making sure that your characters are interacting with the world, making sure the world is beautifully showing your tone, beautifully evoking, and making things feel a certain way. If your character goes into a dungeon because you want to be like, by the way, there's an ancient race of people and they built these awesome things and they've died now, but there's an ancient empire and it's super cool and you should know about it. That's fine. Make the dungeon scary. Make the dungeon terrifying. Make the dungeon full of undead members of the empire who have come back to come and try and help you out of the dungeon or what have you.
Yeah, and you don't have to talk about, in fact, how old the building is. You can talk about the moss on the walls, right? Because if this is a fresh building, you will not have moss on the walls. Absolutely. It will not maybe, for example, have bones hanging around or anything like that. So talk about, in fact, how it feels. What kind of emotions does it create the people in it, one or another, than in fact describing it state by state, effectively.
And then people will care about your ancient civilization because they'll be like, who the crap built this thing? You said nothing happened. Nobody settled here more than 200 years ago. And now you've shown me a building that's a millennium old. And I am curious as a reader. I want to know who the crap is here because I feel like it's going to be awesome and important. And that's the trick. You have to tease, show, present this thing that is very vibrant, that your characters can interact with, which is immersive with all the senses, and then give the punchline. Why is this important? Now, it might only be important because you had to get the MacGuffin from there. And they were the guys that invented the MacGuffin. There are very easy ways to do this with your plot. That's side quests and B plots were made for this. But make sure that you are doing it. Make sure that you're not just saying, by the way, there was an ancient empire of people here and now they're dead. But they built stuff.
And this is the kind of things you can put as essentially descriptions in the small part of your world building you'll be writing down. So if you give an emotion, you want to remember that emotion, write it down in your world building notes, even if it's actually a quote in your world building notes saying, you know what, that's how I described it on that part of the book at that point. So you know kind of the feeling that you had as well for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So these are our advices. That was so Dutch, sorry. This is our advice for exposition in general. But remember that exposition is people, places, and things, and concepts which are often embodied in people, places, and things. Yes. So if you're looking for some specific examples of great way to get exposition going, professionals, people can be shown by professions, opinions, conversations, idioms, cultures, and organizations. It's a great way to share culture. Idioms is one of my favorite, by the way. I'm a big old language nerd. Places, you can foreshadow things with monoliths, scars in the earth, permanent storms. Was there a cataclysm? permanent storm.
Or a festival, for example.
Or a festival. Events are a great way to shadow. And things like set dressing, tapestries in the background, architecture. A character pulls a blanket around themselves. Oh, it's not a blanket, it's a tapestry. They take a close look at it. What's on there? Look, it's foreshadowing.
Or board games, for example, like a piece of board game like chess, for example, has basis on reality. Like it shows the importance, for example, of the ranks of military. Like you know that the soldiers go in the front, they're not so important as the king as the queen, which are protected by everybody else behind them, kind of thing. So games can be used in your world or any other kind of this material culture to show important things without, in fact, talking about them.
It's the spoonful of sugar approach. And it is the best way to convey all of this wonderful world building that you've done and make your setting feel super rich. I see that we're running out of time. So very quickly,
I think we should talk about the next.
This?
Yeah, and the next one. Let's see how it goes.
So our next FAQ is, are my ideas original enough? We hear this so often.
Yes.
We hear people come into our streams often and they'll say, I just created this thing and I really like it. And it works really well with my setting. But is it original enough? I've just written yes at the top in my notes here. Just yes. So a setting feels generic when the specifics are not defined.
Exactly.
If it is a medieval fantasy world, then it's a medieval fantasy world. That could mean one of a number of things, but it feels very nebulous. The minute you get down to the details, that is what makes the setting feel unique and wonderful. So my favorite example of this is The Dragon Prince from the Netflix series. Actually, I know it's not a set of novels. I know it's not writing, but
but it's still a piece of storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. On the face of it, The Dragon Prince is very classic, typical world building. There's a lot of we call
fantasy building, even
fantasy, exactly. We call them Tolkienian races. So the elves, the dwarves, the humans, fine. Okay, there's a sort of classic interplay there. There is some magic. The magic is relatively elemental. None of these things.
They do, in fact, use mosaic world building a little bit because they have the elven lands and the human lands, and there is literally a river separating them.
Yeah.
And there is a massive differentiation between the two, but that becomes part of their world building and part of the magic of the world because it's not just separated because they wanted to be separated and have two different lands. They talk about the separation between them, the concepts they use come into the world building and seep into the actual world to make sense of it.
Yeah. So on the face of it, the Dragon Prince is this very sort of bog standard fantasy world. And yet it is one of the greatest pieces of world building I've seen recently because it is so beautifully detailed. The details are so nicely expressed. Everything is put in motion beautifully. Everything is emotional beautifully. And so the conveying of the world building, the exposition, and also those little touches, that is what makes the setting feel vibrant and it draws you in, even though it's not particularly original.
So to essentially recap here, yes, your world is unique as long as your details from your world building come into action and they give color and vibrance to your world.
Absolutely. It's those little details. And the fact that you person sitting here in the chat right now is building the world is gonna give it the original spin because you are a one-of-a-kind original and your take is going to be a one-of-a-kind original in ways that you're not even going to notice, right?
Absolutely.
And your readers are going to be like, oh my God, it's so cool that this thing. And you'll be like, oh, that didn't even occur to me. That was just what the world looked like in my head, right? So do not stress about having to reinvent the wheel. Add the details, add the vibrancy, put your world in motion and make it emotional and keep track of it so that everything makes sense from scene to scene and from book to book. And your readers will fall in love with it. And with it, they will fall in love with your writing too.
Great. Do you want to talk a little bit quickly about the world building mistakes? Very quickly, as I mentioned.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So there's a few things that we've mentioned before in this talk that I just want to give a little bit of advice about. Think of this as world building surgery. Mary Sue world building. So a Mary Sue character is one of these characters who is essentially flawless. There's nothing wrong with them. Their flaw might be, oh, I'm too pretty when I sleep. But like, there's nothing that you can connect with from that. What is it? Mary Sue world building. The whole world revolves around your character. Now, I am lucky enough to have got to talk to many wonderful world builders, professional world builders. And this is the favorite advice of a friend of mine called Dr. Trent Hergenreder, who is a world building professor. Literally a professor of world building. And he says, essentially, this is the #1 problem that he sees in his own students' work, is that the world is built to serve only that character and has no more depth than that character.
It's like a flashlight flashing on top of your character, moving with them in the world, but also as a black hole, sucking everything towards it. So everything, it's because they exist, in fact, on the world.
Absolutely. So if this might be your world needs more conflict and complexity that doesn't revolve around the main character, okay? There has to be other stuff going on than just the main character. That doesn't mean it has to take the limelight, but there should be other schisms that have nothing to do with them. There should be history that has nothing to do with their plot. It may even involve, like, get into the plot, but it should be from the outside. Yes. Make sure you introduce stuff that has nothing to do with them, basically, but is plot relevant.
Like side plots, for example, a war happening further away, or whatever this might be, events that have nothing to do with them, but they are part of the background of the story.
Exactly. It's particularly a problem with chosen ones, so it's definitely something to watch out for. Genre whiplash, again, I've mentioned this today already. You've established one genre, but then later on, you start blending in a second genre. Everybody was living in caves, but suddenly there are guns. Everybody was medieval fantasy, suddenly aliens. This is why, for me, the final Indiana Jones movie doesn't exist. Because they went suddenly aliens, and I said, no.
Yeah, it was all about ancient I mean, okay.
It was about religion and Earth mythology, and then suddenly there were aliens. It was conspiracy theory. And for me, that was the moment that I checked out. It's a very personal thing. I'm not asking you to agree with me. But yeah, for me, that movie doesn't exist because of genre whiplash. So this is not necessarily a problem as long as it is a conscious choice, #1. And 2, your reader must know what they are getting into. So somewhere on the blurb, it should say aliens, or threat from the skies, or something from beyond, all right? They need to know what they are reading, because otherwise they're going to get halfway in. The people who started the book aren't going to want to finish the book because it's the wrong genre. And the people who would have liked the second half of the book will never start it. So make sure that you have sort of blended everything together so that your readers know what they are getting into. If it changes halfway through, they're going to be sad. World builder's disease. Yes.
We talked about it a little bit, in fact, already.
So, world builder's disease. You have elves in your world. Cool. You have, they wear shoes. Cool. They have a particular style of shoe that is plot important. Like this guy is wearing the wrong shoes and that's important. Fine. You've written a 500-page treatise about elf shoes and the history of elf shoes and which shoes should be worn in which circumstances, and it's not plot relevant. That is world builder's disease. It is compulsively world building things that you know are never going to be used. You might not even be having fun. Sometimes I talk to people who are experiencing this phenomenon. They're like, I just felt like I had to do it. It's a kind of sort of
OCD, compulsive.
A kind of OCD. Like, again, I don't want to throw around, diagnosable diseases, but like you just got to be really, really careful that you're checking back with your meta. You're checking back. Again, this is one of the reasons that we invented agile world building in the first place as a cycle, because you're always checking, do I need this? Do I need a 500-page treatise on elven shoes? So yeah, make sure that you're just checking in that this really is necessary, and you're not just doing this to punish yourself because you had an idea and you don't want it to go away. Note form, no 500-word treatises on elven shoes. Mosaic world building, again, we've discussed this briefly. If your world feels like World of Warcraft, if there is a fairy zone and a fire zone and an ice zone and nobody...
the Elven Kingdom and
exactly.
the Dwarven Mountains.
And nobody trades and nobody talks to each other.
And there are no people living in mixed cities, for example, or anything like that. So
then you'd better have a really good reason why. It can be that way, but you better know why, because your readers are going to be like, well, they could have just borrowed gun from the Dwarven Kingdom and shot this guy in the head, they'd be done. This book will be half the length. You don't want to leave yourself open to that. But also, as we said before, a world is a giant, interconnected, stunning, multifaceted network with unique pockets of wonder, right?
Yes.
So that is what our world is. And that is what our world has always been. And that is a really important thing when you're building as well. So what we suggest is make sure that you do some exposition of things that are outside the scope of your story. If they are only on one island, then there are imports, there is trade, there are characters from other places, there are rumors from other places.
Yeah, actually, these kind of trade posts and things like that are a very good way to merge civilizations. Yeah. Like the thing at the edge of the world, the thing at the edge that people come and from and get to meet each other. These kind of melting pots of civilization are very important locations to invest some time in your world to find out how things connect.
Yeah, even if it's just note form, make sure that there are details of the other spaces, even if it's 3 bullet points.
Jeff, me too. That was such a big thing. I was like, they can return with eagles. Why they couldn't go with the eagles? Yes, I know. I completely agree with you.
I'm not getting into that debate. It's one of the hottest takes in fantasy world building is Tolkien's eagles. So yeah, make sure that you are revealing parts of the world, because otherwise your world is going to feel very small. And what you want is for it to feel this big wondrous thing, and then have the focus on the spot that you're trying to tell the story, right? 2 more. Ultimate power. You've invented an all-powerful MacGuffin. Congratulations, you've broken your book. This is the cup that brings people back to life. Congratulations, nobody dies anymore. Why isn't everybody using this all the time? 3 things here. Limitations, cost, and consequences.
That's very important. Very, very important.
I'm going to say that again because it's really important. Limitations, cost, and consequences. In fact, I have to talk about this in an upcoming video because this is a crucial one. Limitations. Where can it be used? Who can use it? How many times can it be used? Is it an item that will break if it's used a certain amount of times? Does it need charging? How do you charge it? These are all limitations for a magical item. Cost. What is the personal cost? There's a great one from, oh, good grief, Michael Moorcock. The terribly grimdark, everybody's terribly depressed albino guy drinks potions to take over the world.
You know everything apart from the name.
Everything apart from the name.
Yes, Elric.
Elric, there we go. Elric of Melnibone. See, they know what I'm talking about. Thank you. Hopeless with the name. Elric of Melnibone. The swords had to be charged with blood, I believe.
Yes, that's the cost.
That's a big old cost, guys, because you have to be willing to take somebody's life to use these swords. That's a big cost. The cost might be personal. It might be a mana cost. It could be souls, exactly, BC. There's all sorts of things that you can use as cost, but it stops them just using this ultimate power item for ultimate power. And the third one is consequences. We had a chat with our friend, who is a very famous game master, RPG game master, and he came to us and he said, okay, so I've created these mountains that float. That's cool. But the single rocks for them also float, which means I've now created ultimate floating power.
Exactly, because
what
you can
do
have
I
one
do?
of the rock.
Yes.
And, just...
Another, they can just carry anything wherever they want.
Yeah.
So, limitations, it only works in a certain area, for example. Cost, maybe there's it sucks power from things around it. That's pretty evil.
Temperature, for example, so it can be freezing cold around it, kind of thing.
Exactly. And consequences. Okay, fine. This exists in the world. Every single merchant since this has been discovered is now using these. Congratulations, you've now had a tech upgrade in your world. That's fine. That's okay. That is a logical progression. Terry Pratchett does this very nicely with these little cubes in his world, which are sort of permanent motion, continual motion.
Yeah, perpetual machines.
Perpetual motion machines. And he then integrates them into technology to drive an advance in technology. Now, he wrote however many dozens of books in that world before that happened. But once that does happen, that's a new fact of the world. Yeah. That goes into the meta section. Your technology level has just gone up. Congratulations.
And of course, we have to be fair. this world is not exactly the standard book world because
Absolutely not.
it has so many books written in it. So you literally see the meta progressing and changing because the world is progressing and changing through the ages, in fact.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's even good. That is a good thing that the world changes, particularly if your characters are the ones doing the changing, right? Because it makes them feel epic, it gives them agency. But you have to be aware of it. And the very last one is the status quo, which is the opposite of what we were talking about. Not everything in your world should be rigid. You should show changes and trends. And you can look to your mood and genre to decide which way those trends might be going. If your world is a dark world, if it's a gritty fantasy world, then things are getting worse, probably almost everywhere.
But not over all things, though. For example, that's the important thing. Like, if you separate your world into sections, for example, oppression might be going worse, the environment might be going worse, but there might be things that are getting better as well. So showing those trends and those trajectories in your world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, trade is up 75%, but the poor have never been poorer, for example. These are trends that you can show to, again, when we were talking about, you know, your world should be in motion and emotional, showing trends is a great way to make your world in motion and emotional. Showing how things are changing, showing the water is going down or going higher, and that metaphorical water in all other spaces. Magic is getting more or less.
Yeah, for a good example would be any book that talks about war, which effectively you see the conflict and the quality of living going down, but technology goes way up because technological advancements are pushed by war, for example. So you see the technology affecting other parts of the world, even if they're not war-related necessarily because of it.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I have to let in my screaming fur baby.
Guys, this is great, and I hesitate to stop you at all because I feel like you're on such a roll, and everyone in the chat is having such a great time. But we also have 23 questions, so I recognize we're at our 1 hour time limit. So if some people need to run, that's totally fine. But if you guys are happy to stick around for another 20 minutes or so, and we'll just get through some questions, is that cool?
Absolutely.
Okay. And I've also there's a few questions in the Q&A box that are about World Anvil software itself. And we're doing a whole session on World Anvil on Thursday where they're going to share their screens and walk us through everything, all the cool things you can do in there. So I might not prioritize those questions for you. We'll stick to the ones that are particularly about world building. And there's a lot that you covered and there's a lot of questions, but we'll get through as many as we can. And I've also asked Jan, I've also asked if they would join us in our Facebook group and answered some questions there if we put a couple posts up. And they have very kindly agreed. So where do we begin? I've got a good one from Natasha that says, when creating new cultures, what would you say are the things that help define and differentiate cultures from each other than language and geographical location? Any tips or resources that would help in developing new culture?
You want to take this or should I?
Oh, you could.
Yeah. So cultures are a very beautiful thing, and in fact, it's something that I adore. As a sociologist, this is something that is very important to me. Culture is what you get when a lot of people start to be together and start working together towards a common goal. And common goal in the beginning always is survival, but later on can be dominance or anything like that. So when you talk about cultures, think very hard about not only where they are, but how they survive there and how they started surviving, because the procedure of surviving something molds you into who you are. For example, if a culture becomes very warlike because they need to survive because they have a lot of enemies, even that those natural enemies or other cultures, that will take a massive effect on who they are and how they're going to work around them. Will they start enslaving people around them? And that means, will they actually start getting slavery as part of their culture? Will it be something that has to do with the technology of military weapons? Will they start to talk about effectively the way that they build their houses? Because you know what, if somebody burns your house a lot, you move much faster into stone houses. So it's as simple as that. And also it has to do with what do you cherish as a culture? Like some cultures will cherish, for example, wine and drinking over, for example, philosophical discussion. These kind of things are all parts that come from the history of a culture. So think about how they came to where they are, and you'll get the answers about where they are going most of the times. Cultures do not exist in a vacuum. Cultures always exist as part of a network of people around them and the interactions they have. That can be trade, can be war, can be either a philosophical discussions, or even requirement for something or the other kind of thing.
Absolutely. So you see things like colonies forming when people need stuff that they can't get where they are.
Yes.
For example.
Yeah, like Greece, for example, in ancient times, for
absolutely.
example.
Religion is another very big one, I would say. So people who decide to follow the same religion, why ever that happens, if your gods are real, if your gods are not real, whatever happened, you will see that affects interactions, and that will deeply affect the culture as well. And the level to which they are religious as well.
Also, the religion itself is part of culture, because religions, essentially, even in the ancient time, were based on the belief system of the people they had around them. You don't create gods out of nowhere. The gods come from the beliefs that you have and the things that you see around them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And even in places where there is no religion, that becomes a religion.
Yes.
When there's
or
when
becomes
there
a
are
reason,
other
exactly.
options.
Yes.
If you see what I mean. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's often a way of explaining, you know, the things that are happening around you, especially if they seem quite inexplicable, as often is the case in magic.
Absolutely, those sort of etiological stories, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and so that sort of links to Nadja's question, who says, when we talk about some of the main points that should be included in the world building process, what do you mean by political structure? Which I think links into what you were just talking about.
Yes. So we talked about the idea that worlds and organizations, in fact, in your worlds work in a specific way, and that is part, in fact, of the culture. It's a part of the way that they understand the world around them.
Yeah.
The way that people understand who is ruling them and why, or how they should be organized, it has a very significant effect on the world around them and in the world internally.
Yeah.
Dictatorships activate different parts of a social structure than, for example, democracy does, or theocracy, for example, because they will have different focus points, and different focus points will move these organizations, because you know what? Countries are organizations. There might be super organizations that have their own military arms, and they have their own, for example, trade committees, or their own small businesses that they are part of that, but they are still organizations, because an organization is a bunch of people working together towards a common goal. That can be survival, can be domination of others, freedom from others, or whatever this might be. So the way these people will choose to organize themselves in order to achieve their goals will have a generic effect on them and everybody around them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm in the middle of reading Hunger Games to my son, so it's sort of top of mind for me right now. But you know, government and political structures, even though that doesn't seem very sexy for kids to read, is, you know, it's an essential element of that world, isn't it?
Absolutely. There are so many books of great world building that are based on that, like 1984.
Yeah, I mean,
this is all about political structure.
Yeah, well, I think about Brian McClelland's Powder Mage.
Yes.
Brian is one of our Anvilites, and I had to interview him, so I read his book, and I was like, holy crap, this is a great book. I can't believe I didn't read it earlier. But yeah, that's all about what happens when you overthrow a corrupt monarchy. What happens next? It's chaos.
Yes.
Let's go. You know, these are great settings for books. They're great world building elements, and so many evil empires need overthrowing. You know, I mean, that's Star Wars, right? You know, something that we think of as being, you know, very kind of like light and fun. It's Star Wars. You know, it's all about politics. It's all about the Senate.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Absolutely.
So I've got a question here from someone who is concerned it's a stupid question, and it's not. He says,
no questions stupid.
No stupid questions,
no
stupid ideas.
Yeah.
He says, I'm writing a retelling of a popular fantasy story, something, I don't know how to say this, something like the Mahabharata, for example. How do you go about explaining all of those elements from scratch, or can you assume that some readers are aware of it, even if they're from outside of India or the culture that you're writing? And I think that's an interesting question.
It's interesting, very interesting, because that's what genres exist for.
Yeah.
Because, for example, when you say to somebody, it's a high fantasy world, automatically they make some assumptions. They make assumptions like magic will be there, multiple races will be there, things will be wondrous. These are all assumptions that automatically you don't have to explain to them. If you write in the introduction of the book, this is a high fantasy world, these are standards.
But I think even more than that, when you say it's an elf, everybody might be imagining a slightly different elf, but everybody knows it's basically elf-shaped, right?
Yes.
These are things you can't necessarily take for granted when you're working sort of cross-genre, or when you're introducing mythologies to people who aren't familiar with the building blocks.
Yeah, but for example, when it comes to explaining what a Maharaja is, or how, for example, the Indian structure was working back then.
I think it's not about Maharajas specifically.
Okay.
It's a story called the Maharata. Did you say?
Oh no, I think I've clicked it through, but I think it's generally about
Mahabharata.
Yes.
So it's a traditional story from India, I think.
Okay.
That they are retelling as a fantasy tale.
So I think the best way to do that is, first of all, to write your world building so you know which elements you would like to elaborate on, and then give it to your story to tell the story. This is a good example. For example, you don't have to explain everything from the beginning, but you can slowly start introducing information to the user, to the programmer here, to the
readers,
to the readers by conversation or by effectively explanation clearly through the prose.
Yeah, I would add that write what you need to write, make it as clear as you can. You'll give it to your beta readers. Your beta readers will be like, well, I think this thing sounds really cool, but I have no idea what it is. That's amazing feedback. So you will go back. You will describe this thing by putting it in motion and making it emotional. There may be a tiny side journey where they spend a day at the library and one of these things launches out of a book and hits them in the face. Great, fantastic. It's in motion, it's emotional. Now I know what it is. Let's get on with the plot. So that's what I would recommend. Explain as much as you think it needs explaining, rely on your beta readers, and then when you add new layers of information, just make sure that it's in motion and emotional.
And probably you want beta readers that both have read the book and they have not read the book to see the differentiation between
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, great. So when building a world within the normal world, do you have to give an actual location of where it is on Earth, or can that part of Earth be made up as well? And does this affect the realistic factor of my manuscript?
Go on.
It depends on your audience, and it depends how big this made up place is. If it is a town in Utah, fine. Unless your audience is from Utah, they'll probably be fine with that, as long as it sounds like a town in Utah. As long as it sounds conceivably like it could be a town in Utah, fine, all right. If you invent a new island, there better be a good reason why that island is there, if you see what I mean.
Well, also it depends on what you said before about genre clash. If you pitch this thing as a real world story, and you add places that actually do not exist for sure, then you have an issue. If you say this is in fact a fantasy version of that world, like think of Themyscira, for example. In DC, Themyscira is a whole island that does not exist in Greece. I can tell you right now, it does not exist in Greece.
No Amazons running around there, sadly.
But it does exist in the world, and they have found a nice way of putting it there, and it is perfectly fine to do it.
And it's hidden. It's hidden by a big mist, for those of you who don't know. So even though there is a brand new island that does not actually exist in our world, this thing can be set in our world because there is a conceivable, understandable explanation, magic handwavium, that there is mist over it and people just don't find it.
But that's not genre breaking at all.
No, exactly. Because like magic has been established in the world. So that makes sense. If you start describing massive changes in New York and you're expecting people to buy that this is first world, this Earth, this one we're sitting on right now, you're gonna have some issues because people who've ever been to New York, seen New York, anything like that, are gonna sit there thinking, but the Empire State Building isn't made of cheese. Why are you telling me it's made of? I'm so confused right now. In fact, introducing real world locations and adding changes to them, it's an interesting thing to do as long as you're doing it delicately and a way intentionally.
You're kind of like winking at it kind of thing. So you know what? That's the Empire State Building, but in fact on the top now it has gargoyles, for example. So you think of what is the change there, what is the differentiation there, why it happened.
If it's important for your plot, awesome, do it. Make sure you foreshadow that this is the kind of setting you are doing right in the first scene, that somebody's walking through the street and they look up at, I don't know, St. Paul's Cathedral, and St. Paul's Cathedral is all made of glass. It is established that this is different. This is Earth, but not as you know it. then your readers will be fine. If it crops up in chapter 7 for the first time, people are going to think you're making mistakes, and that's what you want to avoid.
Well, and that comes back to what you were saying before, that rule of if you introduce it and make your readers think, is it important and is it awesome, then you're set. Yeah, right? Exactly. If you suddenly find those things, you're going to think this is important. Otherwise, they wouldn't bother telling me.
But it also goes back to genre whiplash. If they think they're reading one kind of book, they get halfway through and they're reading another kind of book, then you've just lost all the readers who would have thought the second part of your book was really awesome, because they're not going to stay with you.
Yeah, I find genre whiplash so frustrating. It's one of my biggest pet peeves, for sure. So there's sort of a more general question about what defines fantasy. Can I have industrialized urban societies and mass production and mechanized warfare all in a fantasy world? How do you mix and meld those, and what's the difference?
I think it's perfectly fine to be. In fact, and anime has done that, I think, better than any other.
Yeah, Clash of the Titans.
Exactly. Any other medium so far. But you should not be putting yourself into boxes, okay? The genres are there to serve you, not for you to serve the genres. And they're there to help you establish some baseline, but that's pretty much it. You should not be saying, oh, this cannot be fantasy because it has steam engines. Why? I mean, in fact,
that's steampunk fantasy.
Exactly. This is a very cool idea. In fact, go ahead and do it, because I would like to read something like that. I would like to see, like BioShock, for example, one of the games that became famous is exactly that. Is in fact talking about the clash of technology and magic, and it does it exactly like that in a steampunk world with magic.
Yeah, absolutely. So fantasy is anything you want it to be. There is science fantasy, which is arguably Star Trek occasionally, but mainly it's a blend of, it's from the future, it's science, but there is magic, and there are people who can use both. There is things like Bright, which is sort of urban fantasy. Yeah. That's fantasy too. You can have futuristic fantasy.
To be fair, that's Shadowrun, and Bright took it from there. But
absolutely. So if we have any tabletop role-playing games people in here, that's of course, Shadowrun is a classic setting like that. Engel is another one.
Yes.
So fantasy really is all about what you want it to be. It is taking the idea, okay, there is magic, there is something special here, and running with it. And there are as many facets and breeds of fantasy as there are authors, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, pretty much. And they should be like that, because that's your unique voice and the uniqueness of your world.
Absolutely.
So go ahead, please do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it brings to mind the Magitech Chronicles by Chris Fox.
Yeah.
Which is, again, it's this sort of big, sprawling science fantasy world. It was amazing. It was dragons in space. I can't think of anything freaking cooler.
But that's the magic of fantasy, isn't it? That it is, compared to almost any other genre, there's almost no boundaries, and you can use the tropes and the genres and those sort of things as shorthand to help people understand. Like you say, if there's an elf, you have a picture in your head of an elf, so that means you don't have to explain what an elf is. But when people then go and create these new characters and these new beings and these new species, it's magic. It's absolute magic.
Absolutely.
All right, let's do one more here, and then we'll maybe move it over to the Facebook group, and when you've got time, we can answer some more questions in there. Diana wants to know if you have any specific books or resources that you recommend reading to help you understand your world building and how to make sure that you're doing it in the right way.
So I know for a fact that Janet is writing right now a blog post about world building books for writers, but if you want a list from myself, I have already posted one on our blog at blog.worldanvil.com, and it has a massive list of world building books that you can go and check it out to get you started, especially with fantasy world building.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Janet, do you want to do you mind sharing that into our Facebook group, and then everybody can check it there?
Absolutely. I'll make sure that I do that. That's blog.worldanvil.com. We release huge amounts of sort of 1 or 2 blogs a week.
Yes.
About world building, but I'll make sure that specific one with those books is there, because there are some gems in there.
Man. Okay, and then I'm so sorry, we still have tons of questions here, but we've run out of time for today. We've got a little bit over, so I apologize for anybody that had somewhere that they needed to be.
I think we talked a lot.
We get very excited about world building, as you may have noticed.
I love it. It's so good. Everyone, have a look in the chat. Everyone is saying thank you and that you're fantastic, and that was an amazing session. So thank you so much.
What I would add, if that's okay, if you are sitting here thinking, oh, they didn't answer my question, we go live at twitch.tv/World Anvil. So that's a Twitch channel.
Yes.
We go live like this, literally in this room, sitting here, answering questions from the audience. Okay.
Every Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday at 7 p.m.
40
UK
minutes from
time.
now.
Exactly. So 7 p.m. UK time, 11 a.m. Pacific time. So you can come and ask us questions and we will answer them the best we can. You can get your articles critiqued if you would like as well.
Yes.
So we will do cold reads of the articles and let you know our thoughts, what we think, how things are going, all of that kind of stuff. Again, if you want to check out our YouTube channel, there's lots of sort of shorter, bite-sized pieces about world building, full of inspiration. It's full of advice, both for writing and for game mastering, because again, we very much exist in both of those spaces. So yeah, please do drop by. We'd love to see you, basically is what I'm saying.
Awesome. Great. I feel like everybody's going to come away from this all inspired and ready to build their stories based around dragons in space or whatever it is. So that's great. And for those of you that are coming to the write-in 40 minutes, that's all going to be based around fantasy prompts tonight. So you can get started there and see if you can find a little seed that might germinate into some of these stories during that session. So thank you again. We will see you on Thursday to go deep into World Anvil itself and figure out how it all works and how our authors can use that to build their worlds.
Amazing.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.